potekal v angleškem jeziku. Dovolite, da tudi sam kar takoj začnem z nagovorom v angleščini. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On this Monday morning of a very exciting week and exciting spring. My name is Miha Lobnik. I come from Društvo Informacijski center Ljubljana, which is one of the NGOs working in the field of LGBT rights in Slovenia. We are very happy to host this event today. It's been a long time since we were working and dreaming in the field of the LGBT rights. And let me start on a personal note. In the 1998, when Ljubljana was formed, I was in Amsterdam, in Netherlands, at the Gay Games, a very big international event on sports, and there was a conference on human rights which I attended. I met many friends there who were very inspiring and supportive through all these years in our work in Slovenia. And then in 2001, I was in Paris, and I experienced my first gay pride, which was attended by 1 million people. Going to the Place de la République in this crowd, I felt freedom I didn't feel in Slovenia on the streets before. And finally, with my friends and supporter in London, Michael Cashman, a member of the European Parliament, was a big inspiration and a great ally. And finally, last year in London with my colleagues, we presented the tourist product Pink Week in order to invite people from UK to come to Slovenia. So it's 3 countries which are connected to a lot of friends, and for us here in Slovenia, London, Paris and Amsterdam are a metaphor of freedom. We remember our experiences there, we made great friends. So I'm bringing this in as a special personal circumstance. That's why I'm very happy to have today with us the respected ambassadors of France, Mr. Pierre-François Mourier, His Excellency, Chargé d'Affaires of UK Embassy, Mr. Christopher Yvon, nice to have you here, and Mr. Pieter Langenberg, Your Excellency from Dutch Embassy. I'm also very happy to have our dear friend Lousewies van der Laan, Vice President of ALDE Europe, to chair and host this discussion. Now, we learned in those years that the social change comes from within of the society if we want it to be sustainable. But when we talk and share experiences about freedom and equality, it's much more exciting to do it together. So welcome all, please take the chairs.
To learn more about the experiences of other countries. I'm actually extremely excited as well because I've followed the developments in the Netherlands quite closely, but for me also learning more about the French and the British equality experiences is quite new. And the way we'd like to do it this morning is that the ambassadors will each speak for 7 to 10 minutes about the main considerations in their country with regard to marriage equality. And then we would really like to open it up to your questions and your comments to make sure this is a real interactive discussion. So can I start on my left? Because the Dutch, of course, were the first, the Brits were the last, and the reason the French are here is not only because of Miha's personal preference, but if you look at the international lists on which country scores best, the French don't only have the best healthcare system in the world, but they also are the best when it comes to equality for the LGBT community. So we have the first, the last, and the best. All together, we're going to go in this order. Your Excellency, please.
Well, good morning, everybody. I suppose I'm invited indeed because we were the first, but that's not my accomplishment. It's a reflection, I think, where the debate in society stands. And I hope that Slovenia will not be the last, but I don't think so, because you have a lively debate here in society, and in itself it's a good thing. I would almost say that when I was studying history and the influence of Marxism, even in the Dutch university, was still quite high, we learned there that you first have to focus on the contradictions, bring them out, before you can find a new balance on a higher level. And this I wish, of course, for other countries as well. Now, as Lousewies van der Laan on my right hand said, As early as in the 1980s, activists in Holland have been demanding equal rights for homosexuals with regard to marriage. And after a few years, and this was in 1995 already, well, in the typical Dutch way how we handle conflict in politics, we named a commission to investigate the possibility of same-sex marriage. And the conclusion of this commission was that civil marriage should be extended to include same-sex couples. And then it still did take to the 1st of April 2001 before the Parliament voted on the legislative proposals. So it did take us more or less 20 years before we came to the end of the road. We have 150 parliamentarians in the Dutch Parliament. We had 109 voting in favor and only 33 voting against the extension. And in a way it reflects already how society felt about the issue. It was not really such an issue anymore, and that's why the legislation was possible. And it made us, I think, the first country in the world that allowed people from the same sex to marry. And nowadays, I would say, it's not an issue at all anymore. Equal marriage is fully accepted and fully integrated into society. But if we talk about same-sex marriage, for us, for diplomats abroad, then we are talking about human rights. This is an issue that we take up in the context of human rights. For us, it's a human rights issue. And why is it a human rights issue? Because the principle of equality is of essence, and anti-discrimination is of essence. And in some countries where gay rights are not possible, for example, I served in Georgia for 4 years, and I can tell you that freedom of expression and freedom of assembly for the gay community is not widely accepted over there. On the contrary, and I wish everybody not to live in such an intolerant society as far as this principle is concerned. So generally we feel that same-sex marriages should be allowed and should be enshrined into the law in the Netherlands. And of course there was some opposition in the Netherlands, some people with a more conservative background, sometimes because of religious reasons, they were not happy with the legislation. But if you would ask them now, most of our parliamentarians, even the parties that voted against it in 2001, they would say, well, personally, I might not favor the principle, but as I am a Democrat, I accept that society and the majority of the society feels differently, and also the principle of equality is fully accepted by all our parliamentarians. So on a personal basis, they might not be happy with it, but as true Democrats, they accept that the majority feels differently. When we speak about it, we too often use the words gay marriage. Generally, we feel in the Netherlands that we, although it's speaking language, that we should not use it too much, because it gives you the impression that you are making an exception to some other rule. And if you have this equality principle, this human rights considerations, then you should watch your language a little bit more carefully, I feel. So we decided that we would not make an exception to marriage law, but we decided in the Netherlands that we would not roll up a new law, but basically we changed the definition for the old law. And the reason for that is, of course, that we feel that all marriages should be considered equal, so they should fall under the same law. So we have no new law, or we didn't approve a kind of gay marriage that would make it a kind of surrogate marriage. We only speak in the Netherlands of equal marriage and not of gay marriage. And I think from the perspective of equal rights before the law, this is the proper thing to do. Now, I already touched on the fact that you always have some sensitivity in society. In every democracy, people don't agree for 100% on ethical norms and values. And this was, and I want to mention it nonetheless, this was illustrated as well in the Netherlands, because if you perform a marriage in the Netherlands, you need a civil servant for that, and not all civil servants in every village or every town in the Netherlands were happy with that. So he made an exception for civil servants on grounds of conscience, that if they had serious ethical problems, that they would not be forced into performing the marriage. We still have a number of those civil servants, and were a number of villages where they applied this. But I'm happy to say that almost within half a generation, within the last 13 years, it has so well integrated this idea of equal marriage into our society that we could draw up a new law in 2013 that said, in fact, that if you are a civil servant in the Netherlands, and if you are hired as a new civil servant, you are no longer allowed to have any conscious objection. So, in a way, municipalities have the right nowadays to fire civil servants who still have the same objections. In a way, it makes sense, even as a diplomat, it's not a good comparison. If I don't agree with the principles of Dutch foreign policy or Dutch human rights policy, then in fact it would be difficult, I think, to represent my own country, and I should not speak on behalf of my own country. In fact, I should look for another job, I think, and not stay in the same profession. Luckily, I don't have a problem with all of this, I would say, but the law should be respected. I think this is the idea and the feeling of the majority of the population as reflected in Parliament should be reflected. Now there's another thing that might be worthwhile mentioning. Of course, for us it was always, as we always subscribe a lot to the importance of human rights, and we have a very high profile as a country, I think, in the human rights field. Automatically, I think that every Dutch diplomat abroad takes a rather strong and sometimes controversial position on gay rights and on human rights in general. So you might quite often see, if you have a gay pride, you might often see a Dutch diplomat and some other diplomats as well participating in that. And in a way, we feel it's part, I think, of the common values we share and of our foreign policy priorities. Personally, I would like to add perhaps to it as well that as it's fully accepted principle in Dutch society, by coincidence you have here an ambassador and a diplomat sitting that is almost in an old-fashioned way married to his female partner, but my successor might be as well be a representative of the same-sex marriage and might have a same-sex partner, and for the Dutch this would be no problem at all, and it shows the way that society can change and can develop, and that some issues that are of course sometimes controversial and might create quite a polarized debate. After some time, if people get used and are more tolerant and are more acceptable of these issues, then it's not an issue at all anymore. And this I wish for Slovenia as well.
Great. Thank you very much.
It appears that with the French ambassador, you have a second example of a heterosexual ambassador married to a woman partner and with 4 children. So, I mean, that's life. I'm not sure it's coincidental. I think it's a very good idea to have us speaking about the marriage for all, because we cannot be suspected of any inclination on one way or another, actually. I told my marriage for all, because the wording we adopted in France, we don't want to adopt the word gay marriage as in the Netherlands. The idea of equality is contained within this marriage for all. And then in a few years we will say only marriage. It will be perfectly normalized, I would say. But still, it was a very long journey. In 2013 in France, the equivalent of IMAD discovered that roughly 100,000 same-sex couples were active in France, 10% of them living with children. So it's a reality. It's not, of course, a mass reality, but still it's a very, very significant reality. And thus, as I told you, it took us a very long journey, even longer than in the Netherlands. Just imagine that in 1982, homosexuality was still criminalized in France. 1982, it's not so long ago. And the decriminalization of homosexuality was adopted by the François Mitterrand's government and by the then Minister of Justice, Robert Badinter. Not coincidentally, Robert Badinter was also the one who passed the law on the abolition of death penalty. And it's not, again, coincidence. In 1999, another left government, led by Lionel Jospin, Prime Minister, passed a law on the PACS, the Civil Solidarity Pact, which was kind of ersatz of marriage, because then the society was not totally prepared to accept marriage. It was a civil union that established the rights and duties between the spouses, but had no effect on the descent. Adoption or assisted reproduction were prohibited, no inheritance upon death of the partner, etc. So it was, again, not really a marriage, a normal marriage, I would say. In 2004, one of our very, very prominent and vocal politicians, Langenberg, with an ecologist, again on the left of the spectrum, celebrated as a mayor a civil marriage between two men. It was a huge media controversy, actually. A lot of people applauding, a lot of people despising this move by Langenberg. But still, it put the topic on the agenda of the politicians. And in 2012, during his campaign, François Hollande committed to pass a law on the marriage for all as soon as he would be elected. And the law actually was finally adopted in May 2013. 1982, decriminalization of homosexuality, 2013, adoption of the marriage for all. In those more than 30 years, the society evolved dramatically in France towards more equality, towards in a way also towards more indifference to the differences. The idea that private life is private life, that everybody should be able to have his privacy, his or her privacy, without the state interfering in his private life. I will say a few words on the framework of this marriage for all law, because it can be of some interest for you, considering the fact that in this country, if everything goes well, you maybe have that kind of law very, very soon. So we opted not to make a big law, a full-fledged law with a lot of articles, but only to make some changes in the civil code, which was, from our point of view, much easier and, to be honest, much more efficient than passing the law for the ages. So the law just amends several articles of the civil code. One of those articles becomes marriage is contracted by two persons of different sex or the same sex. It cannot be clearer. We didn't want to leave a kind of ambiguity by just stating a marriage is contracted between two persons. We wanted to be clearer than that. The law also opens full adoption to homosexual marriage and the possibility to adopt the child of the spouse. But it's still impossible, for obvious reasons that you will certainly understand. It's full impossible for French citizens to celebrate their wedding abroad when the host country does not allow marriage for all. For example, as a civil officer in Slovenia, of course, done a lot of marriages between Slovenian and French citizens, or between French citizens, but I cannot yet officialize a marriage for all in this country, because we do respect, of course, the law of this country. We also have a very interesting article which reflects to what Pieter said a few minutes ago. From now on, the prohibition, there is a prohibition of sanctioning or dismissing an employee for refusing, because of his sexual orientation, a mutation or a posting in a country criminalizing homosexuality. It means that civil servants, especially in the diplomatic corps, but also any private employee from a private company, can refuse to be transferred to a country which still criminalizes homosexuality. And you know there are a lot of countries in this case today in 2050. Just a word on our judiciary bodies, because as often the law was attacked in front both the Conseil d'État and of the Cour de Cassation. Conseil d'État is our Supreme Court for administrative matters. The Cour de Cassation is our Supreme Court for all judiciary matters. And both of them reject the attacks for not only for juridical reasons, to be perfectly honest, also because our judiciary body, our administrative body, does not like to interfere within the politics of the country. When there is a strong political will, we always, I say we because I'm a member of the Conseil d'État actually, we always try to respect the will of the Parliament. And even if we have to find some peculiarities, we do respect the will of the people, because the will of the Parliament, at the end of the day, is the will of the people. So France is the 14th country in the world and number 9 in Europe to open marriage to same-sex couples, which 14th in the world, mind you. It's not a lot of countries still. We came after the Netherlands, which has often paved the way, or showed the light, you know. Belgium, Spain, Norway, Sweden, Iceland, Portugal, Denmark, and just before the UK. But I would like to state that it was not an easy process, this law. We had a lot of demonstrations in France during the passing of the law, before it was adopted. Some demonstration put in the streets more than 1 million people. And it was not only reactionary people. It was a lot of people who had religious convictions, mainly Catholic religious convictions, but also Muslim convictions. And today the National Front is kind of surfing on the problems of Muslims with marriage for all to attract Muslims towards National Front, which is an extreme right party. You know, everything is kind of mixed up in this story. So we'll be short on that, but please know that it was a rough process, and that interestingly enough, before the law was debated, a large majority of French people were in favor of the law. During the debate, this majority shrank. It was still a majority, but with a very thin margin. And now, again, after the law is passed, we have a strong majority of people, 68% of the French citizens who are in favor of the marriage for all, and more than 55% in favor of the adoption, which is, of course, marriage goes with adoption in a way, but still it's not in the minds of people exactly the same thing. How many same-sex marriage it's interesting because in 2013, the law was adopted in May, we had 7,000 same-sex marriages in France and 10,000 in 2014. And we'll see if the progression is real, considerable or not. I cannot say for the moment. Interestingly enough, also in Paris, marriages between same-sex represent 13% of people in 2014, against only 4% nationally. So there is a kind of over-representation in the capital city of same-sex marriages for obvious reasons, on which I will come back maybe just in a few minutes. So as I told you, not everything is settled yet and by far. First, an association homologue to your association, which is called SOS Homophobia in France, maybe you know it, very active. Not in its report in 2013, the 2014 is not yet public, an increase of 54% compared to 2012 of homophobic physical assault. 54%, it's a lot. There is basically one every 2 days in France, which is significant. And at the same time, anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim acts also are on the rise in France, more since the events, as you can imagine, of January 2015, but it was a trend since a few years. So we have to be very careful in all our countries, to be honest, with the rise of intolerance. And when intolerance is at stake, it's not only against homosexuals, not only against people who have a different life, but it's also against everybody who is different, in a way. Muslims, Jews, and why not Protestants in France? I don't think so, because there is a long tradition of very smooth integration of Protestants in France. But still, it's to be considered. And then the big picture is even gloomier, because as you know, a lot of countries do not accept marriage for all. In Russia, in June of last year, 2013, the Duma extended the ban of adoption by gay couples and singles from countries that have legalized gay marriage. So now, from now on, a French citizen cannot adopt anymore in Russia. And even in our Western developed countries, we have a tendency to offer children for adoption only within our country. Which is a kind of protectionism of adoption, if I may say so, which is not a good thing. But there are also a lot of reasons to be optimistic, from my point of view. Today, I'm ready to take the bet that, not at all for philanthropic reasons, or ethical reasons, or moral reasons, the marriage for all will spread very quickly in the world. Not for philanthropic reasons, but just because it's economically wise. And very often, what is economically wise becomes the mainstream. It's a very simple narrative. According, again, to a study of our statistic body in France, dating back to 2013, 48% of same-sex couples have a university degree, against 28% for heterosexual couples. 75% live in a large urban center, and 30% of them in Île-de-France, which is a big region around Paris. And we also see a slight but significant over-representation of homosexuals in the what we call the CSP plus managing professions. What does it mean? It means that the power of conception is much bigger than the average population. And when you have people who have a wallet fuller than other, you have a tendency to favorize those people. And it's, of course, not only rational, but also, in our case, it joins back the moral in a way. In 2013, we had the first G-Day in Paris. This G-Day was the first gay wedding show. So it took a few months for marketers to tell to themselves, okay, now there is a marriage for all, so let's do a salon de mariage, a marriage show for same-sex couples. And gay marriage marriage for all in France represents in 2013 around a turnover of around 93 million euros, which is again significant, with an average budget of 14,000 euros, which is more than heterosexual marriage. Interesting also. So if the countries don't want to stay in the margins of economic development, not only of moral and human development, but economic development, there is no choice in a way but to go towards the equality of marriage and freedom of marriage. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Utro. I'd like to thank the Centre, Miha and his team, for the kind invitation to speak today. And I'm also very grateful to our moderator, Lousewies, for the assistance up here, and also great to be with my colleagues, the Dutch and French ambassadors. I would like to say thank you to all of you as well, of course. I don't think we almost have no empty chairs in the room, and that's an excellent sign. And whatever your view is on marriage equality, whether you were opposed or in favour, I'm glad you're here. A genuine consultation and debate only happens through a rich discussion, so thank you very much for coming. I've got a cold, and I apologise if my voice is not carrying well. If you can't hear me, please put up your hand and I'll try to up the volume a little bit. I'd like to start with a little bit of context, if I may, in the case of Britain, and also link that a little bit to the modern day and how I feel personally and diplomatically. Before I then speak a little bit about marriage equality and the process in the UK, and then try to offer very briefly at the end a thought about where do we go from here. I think in context, this year is 800 years since the Magna Carta was signed and sealed in the United Kingdom. This was, for many people in Britain, many people like myself that did history at school, the start of a journey, an evolution of human rights development in the United Kingdom. We're celebrating it this year. Many people pinpoint that as the beginning, 800 years, and that sometimes gives a sense that we must have achieved so much in 800 years and we've had time to achieve perfection. Well, that's not really the case. It's a very long, difficult journey. And hearing my French colleagues speak about the difficult nature of many topics, but specifically, I think, equality of marriage, they are extremely hard. It is a long journey. And even thinking of that 800 years in the UK since our first human rights document, if you like, it was less than 200 years ago that Britain experienced the last executions in the UK for homosexual acts under the law then. So that just gives you a sense of the time frame. I said I'd try to link that diplomatically and personally, that very long journey. I think if I think about now, the modern day, how I feel about my career, which is only a quarter of a century long since I joined the diplomatic service. A few years ago, many years ago actually, I was posted to Saudi Arabia and I spent 3.5 years there. And one of the unusual aspects of a British diplomat's life doing consular work in Saudi Arabia is that you have a marriage bond and you are actually allowed to perform a marriage service. And when anyone says to me, in 25 years, can you pick out something that you were really proud of in your career, really pleased, I always include being able to marry two people, because it's emotional significance, feeling part of that, what it meant to people. I could see the joy on people's faces. And that for me signified that marriage, love, and everything that represents is just such a wonderful association. And why wouldn't we want to bring that for everyone in an equal manner? And diplomatically, It was interesting that Pieter said, well, his successor may come and perhaps have had legal marriage and a same-sex relationship. We are seeing that already in the British diplomatic service. And before coming to speak, I got in touch with the British ambassador in Athens, who married his husband about a year ago, and is the ambassador there dealing with the ministries there, dealing with contacts, dealing with the British community. And he said that there had been actually a remarkable respect and sometimes curiosity, I think, to see a British ambassador with his husband. And his husband said that sometimes if they host a reception, someone will come up to him and say, well, so you're the British ambassador, it's lovely to meet you. And he'll say, no, it's the other British guy in the suit. And that just shows so far that we've come in my own service, which when I joined the diplomatic service, if I had declared that I was homosexual, immediately I would have had to resign from the office. It was a bar prohibition on joining my own service at the time that I joined. So a lot of that has really made me think about the value of equality. And I was so pleased when I arrived in Slovenia that one of the very first things I did, thanks to my communications manager who's sitting at the back, Dunya, one of the very first things I did was to take part in a promotion of equality relationships in the LGBT community, in a photograph of myself and my wife, not a same-sex marriage, as we've heard on the panel, sitting there with our daughter and saying, look, that, all of these voices count in support, and actually marching with Pieter on the Pride March in Ljubljana as well. It's been lovely to show the consistency of British policy. That's a lot of personal and diplomatic comment. In terms of the campaign in the UK, I'm not going to give you a technical history lesson. We have the internet these days and open government in the UK, and it would be very easy for you to find data and material there. I don't think I need to be lecturing people. But I wanted to say I'll draw a few lessons out of the UK's experience. One is, yes, it's very hard. It's exceptionally hard if you are campaigning for something and you find that there are strongly opposing voices who are using the same platform and rhetoric that you are. So you can go out and talk about human rights and respect for people's family life, respect for individual beliefs. But in the UK, one of the lessons was that you were actually confronted with many people talking about respect for freedom of religion and freedom of speech. And that this is not a one-dimensional human rights argument where you are sort of, you can pretend that you're on the side of the angels and everyone else somehow has an agenda that is totally different to yours. That human rights debate has to be an intelligent discussion. And to find out where the interface comes. The way that happened through UK legislation was to ensure that it was not an obligation under the law for religions in the UK to perform same-sex marriages. They were free to opt in to conduct them, but it required that opt-in. It was not an obligation. And it required an individual, say, minister in the Anglican Church to agree that they personally wished to do it. And the religious premises, the venue, also would need to be licensed to be able to carry out same-sex marriages. So there was that, if you like, represents some of that area that needed to be filled in to ensure that there was an acceptable balance. And the European Court of Human Rights has accepted that there cannot be such an obligation, that it is for states to make their own decisions, and that's how intelligently we addressed that in the UK. I think the second point I drew from the UK experience is the power of civil society. Campaigners like, and some in the room would have heard of him, Peter Tatchell, for example, who spent over 2 decades campaigning for equality for the LGBT community, and particularly around equality of marriage. and when the legislation in the UK received royal assent in 2013, the final step to establish an Act of Parliament, both the Prime Minister, David Cameron, and the Deputy Prime Minister, Nick Clegg, in the UK, spoke publicly about their admiration for civil society and the role that they played in being a real engine for change and supporting lobbying Parliament and so many creative activities, including singing outside of the Houses of Parliament, leaflet campaigns, all kinds of activities. In that vein, I think I welcome this event today. And I think the other aspect I would perhaps draw out of it is the broadest possible consultation. And there were over 700,000 submissions when there was a consultation on equality in the UK. Interestingly, in terms of equal marriage, there were about 500,000, 500,000 of the 700,000 were actually from organisations that were opposed to having an equal marriage law, and around 230,000 were in favour. Where it made a big difference was that the government showed leadership and said a lot of the 500,000 submissions were actually saying we don't agree with equal marriage, and the government's response was we're having equality of marriage. What we're interested in is how we implement it, not whether we implement it. That strong leadership from the executive made a big difference. Those are some of the lessons I draw out of it. I'm interested in exploring more through the questions and answers. I suppose my last comment, I said briefly, where do we go from here? I think this is important for Slovenia, as well as for countries like the United Kingdom, and I know that my two colleagues represent countries that feel passionately about this too. And perhaps this is a diplomatic instinct. What you do domestically should be reflected in what you do internationally. And that where there is an inconsistency in you having one set of values at home and one set of values overseas, that rather betrays your system of values. So I think it's really important if you have an international human rights agenda that's very powerful, as Slovenia has, the UK, the Netherlands, France, how does that reflect back to what you do at home? And are you giving a consistent message? And of course it works vice versa. What we've been able to do in the UK means in the UN, we've been trying to champion resolutions on issues such as sexual orientation. So those two, I'll leave you that last thought, where do we go from here? Well, let's have that consistency and power of messaging. Thank you very much.
Maman and children. A dad, a mom and children. As simple as that. What can you answer to that kind of an issue? It's just a question of belief, actually. How will we deal with that? In a way, the government chose to be very calm, to act smoothly. They had a comfortable majority at the parliament, making the bet that after the law is passed, everything will go back to normal, and that the Jewish Republic would not invalidate the law, which was the case. So they bet on time, to be honest. And after the kind of uprising, everything went calmer and calmer. As far as the conscious objection of conscience is concerned, in France, only a mayor can marry people, not a civil servant, except abroad, which is my case in Slovenia, and the problem is different. So we didn't. The government didn't want to grant a kind of clause of objection to the mayors. Why? Because the mayors are elected officials, not civil servants. And as an elected official, you can choose first not to be elected, and second to change the law if the law doesn't please you. You have this power to change the law. A civil servant doesn't have this power to change the law. He is obliged to follow the law. Thus, the clause of conscience. An elected official, if he doesn't agree with the law, free to him to change it, if he has the majority to change it. And if he doesn't respect the vote of the majority, he would better change jobs and go to do something else. And it's the basic rule of our democracy is based on the sovereignty of the majority. So the situation was a little bit different than in Great Britain or Netherlands.
I just want to make one small additional point so that it doesn't misrepresent the situation in the UK. The UK has nations, England and Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland. Much of the equality legislation that I've been talking around is in respect to England and Wales. In Northern Ireland, there is no equality of marriage legislation that's been passed yet. There is a big Catholic community, a big Protestant community. Of course, that will play its role in that. So I just wanted to be clear that that's not the case in Northern Ireland. Though my understanding is that there are many couples seeking to bring legal challenge to that situation, having seen the situation in other parts of the UK.
Maybe on a personal note, I can add that when we were dealing with the last remnants of the conscientious objector civil servants, that one of the questions we asked in Parliament was, well, what if a civil servant says, I don't want to marry 2 Jews, I don't want to marry 2 black people? And there comes a point where you just, as a civil servant, you have to obey the law, and you cannot say, I will pick and choose who I think should get married. And I think that's a litmus test I've always used when people said, well, I don't want to have a gay teacher. Well, would you say, I don't want a Jewish teacher? Would you feel that you could actually say, I don't want a black teacher? How come we still allow people to say things that we don't allow with other minorities? So that's, I've always found that very useful in trying to explain it's a human rights issue. All right, there's a question from the lady in the back.
Possible candidates for 2017, the former president of France already said, a little bit pushed by his militants, to be honest, and during the meeting, which is never improvised during the meeting, he already said that he would try to come back on the law. To be clearly honest, right now in France, there is inside the opposition, the right opposition, a fierce battle between those who want to go even more on the right and those who would like to appeal to the center and even a part of the left. I don't know yet who will win the battle for primary, to be quite honest. My wishes, of course, but say this other. And it will depend a lot on that. But really, when the Pax, the Civil Solidarity Pact, was promulgated in 1999, part of the right, not Chargé, who was re-elected, but part of the right already said that we will come back on this law and we will destroy the Pax, and they did not. They did not, because when a law, that kind of law, becomes real, you have to experience extremely devastating events to go backwards. We had that kind of experience in the 1930s, as you know, in many countries in Europe, including in France, with the famous Statute of the Jews, which was promulgated by Vichy. But it really takes a world war to have that kind of backward movement, I think. So I'm very optimistic, and I don't think it will change in the near future in France.
And maybe from the Dutch experience, because since 2001 the Christian Democrats have been in power.
Yeah, of course, it's quite some time ago in the Netherlands that we passed the legislation, but when the Christian Democrats were, I think from their religious backgrounds, always the most hesitant or negative about the legislation, they never proposed in any election or they tried to change the existing legislation, in fact. So it illustrates as well that society evolves and values evolve. So I'm not really afraid for the Netherlands. I would say that something like that would happen. How that translates to other countries, one step at a time, I would say. In the end, it might be France or the Netherlands or the UK or Slovenia. In the end, the majority in Parliament always has the last word, I would say. Such is the democracy.
reminding us up a little bit about what's going on in the other countries, especially before the discussion which will be in the Parliament about this. Not to repeat those who spoke about before, I would like just to show small remark on did we chicken out? Indeed we did, but once we didn't. But unfortunately, the Constitution Court interfere. I would say that I'm very upset about this, interfere in the sphere of human rights and allow the referendum in Slovenia, which, from my perspective, was unacceptable. But Constitution Court is Constitution Court, so we must follow this. What I would like to ask my dear ambassadors is, due to the fact that the reduction of the discussion in Slovenia concerning the gay marriages is always ending with the adoption of the children. So I would like to, a little bit of the elaboration, Pierre already started when he mentioned the percentage of the people supported the gay marriages or marriages for all, with 65 as I understood, and 55 of them are in favor of adoption. I would like just to hear a little bit of your, let's say, experience, how this goes together. Just to clarify myself, I'm fully supportive for the adoption of the children also by the
It's an excellent question because it goes right in the core of for some people, the problem of marriage law. You noticed the difference of adhesion of the population between marriage and adoption, but still adoption is supported by a majority of French citizens, which is the important thing, of course. And it's in a way normal that the society evolves at different levels on different topics. Marriage, honestly, is really now considered by French citizens like a private thing. And nobody should interfere into private things. Adoption, it's the life of the children, it's give birth or not. It's a little bit different symbolically. So society will take a longer time to support fully the right to adopt. But at the end of the day, marriage goes with adoption. As soon as you are married, you have the right to adopt. And there is no juridical problem with that kind of automaticity between marriage and adoption. A lot of people, I remember when I was a young member in Conseil d'État in 2001 or 2, I don't remember, I was interviewed by a media, and I told that I was personally in favor of not only of marriage for all, but of adoption. I was summoned by my president of the Conseil d'État. It was not really fun. Who told me, did you forget that the Conseil d'État already pronounced itself against adoption? No, Mr. President, I was acting just possibly. And then 10 years later, the Conseil d'État sanctified the adoption for homosexual couples. So things take some time, but at the end of the day, it's reason always prevails. Of course, this debate is very linked to what we call in French secularity, basically. The fact that the state doesn't mean that the state does not interact with religions. It just means that everybody has his kind of domain field and does not have to interfere in the other's field. So, of course, the marriage for all is only, it goes without saying, but it's only a civil marriage. It's the marriage in front of the mayor. And as far as I know, I don't think the Catholic Church will evolve very quickly towards marriage equality, even if the current Pope is of course changing things very quickly within the Church. But still, it's a very big step to go forward for the Catholic
Church. Well, I think I would just say that it has been a very difficult issue in terms of the UK context as well. And I think linking it to the question earlier about how do you win the argument with some of those opposing voices, it's where the debate becomes much broader, because there were politicians in the UK who were supporting equal marriage but taking a very different position in terms of adoption, and even suggesting that it was detrimental if you had no father present in a family unit, even though back in 2009 for women who wanted IVF treatment to bring up children, there were changes to the legislation allowing a lesbian couple to bring up and adopt a child and even give birth to a child. So I think it broadens the debate out and makes it much more difficult. I don't have any magic answers for your debate. You will know exactly where those forces come from.
Generally speaking, I think we all had some problems, I suppose, after passing the law and putting it into practice. But the point of departure is basically that we want same-sex marriages to have exactly the same rights as other marriages. So if it's necessary to enshrine it in the law, then you just have to do it. We've just done it in the Netherlands as well. And for example, if you have two lesbian parents, then, for example, what you were mentioning, it's not necessary anymore in the Netherlands that the partner of the biological mother has to go to the judge to become, in a legal sense, parent of the child itself as well. But I think these are details that can be worked out later. But the point of departure is in fact personal rights.
Christian Democrat, the Justice Minister, and I said, so we have a situation where a woman is married, a woman gets pregnant, a woman has a baby. If she's married to a man, the man is automatically legally the father, even if he had nothing to do with the conception. Where if she's married to a woman, the woman has to go through a 2-year procedure to adopt, which is horrible because if something could happen to the biological mother, the child has grown up with these two mothers, has lost tragically her mother, will have to then cannot be with her other mother anymore. So that it creates this legal insecurity. And it took us a while, but we managed to get rid of this and say, look, if you're married, then the child that is born will be both, the child of both, of course. So we got rid of that adoption. So that was a step forward, but also that took some time there.
The things that need to happen in the society in which you live, if this legislation is adopted. Has these things came true? Did you see unintended negative aspects of that? Because we are hearing a lot of that in Slovenia and elsewhere. And since you've been through, you have the legislation, people are leaving. Is everything fine?
When I was thinking about coming here this morning to speak, I asked myself the same question, and it's hard for me to take a photograph of exactly sentiment, feeling, what happened, put it all together and give you a scientific answer. But it occurred to me, what about asking a slightly different question? This is about equality and human rights. Do I think it's all gone wrong in Britain because we gave women the vote? Do I think it's all gone wrong in Britain because we abolished the death penalty? If we want to protect the integral nature of human rights, you have to sort of say, well, this is a very long journey where we are increasingly allowing equality. And for me, even to say, do I think it's all gone wrong because we gave women the vote? Everyone laughed, and you sort of say, well, that's crazy. How could it possibly go wrong? Well, I put the same back.
I do totally agree with Christopher, of course. It was kind of a rhetorical question, and of course, that's our friend not collapse yet. For the implementing of marriage for all, we had our share of tragedy, as you know, in the beginning of the year. And again, what is the most preoccupying for our authorities is the rise of intolerance and the rise of extremisms, wherever they come from, to be honest. But really, marriage for all is not an issue anymore at all.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think with my two colleagues, I think you have to be consistent as a society as well, and this is what we try to do. And of course, it's unfortunate then we still have homophobia, we still have hate speech, we still have problems, but I think we have to work on it. And, well, basically you have to work on every democratic right, I think, consistently. I think Holland, in the end, is only better off than we were before. I will not use the economic argument, because I don't think this is the main reason for adapting the law, but it shows that you have everybody more fully involved and contributing to society. If you give everybody, every minority, the right to fully participate as a citizen, and that's how it should be, I think, within the EU.
Thank you very much, and I think on that very optimistic note, I would like to invite